there's nothing wrong with aid in the interim. There is something fundamentally wrong with a long-term strategy that is designed on aid. And that's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm saying it's time for us to start having the discussion. It's been 60 years. When are we going to have a comfortable discussion about exit strategies? And I'm actually fine if African governments say, you know what, I need you to quadruple the aid budget for the next 50 years, but after that, we're going to wean ourselves off. That's a very different discussion than us all sitting here comfortably and saying, actually, we just need more aid. Mm-hmm. We need jobs. It's very simple. We need jobs, like everywhere else in the world. And as far as I can see, aid has not generated jobs across the continent. The reason why Africa has grown at 7% or plus, in some cases double-digit in the past 10 years, is in spite of aid, not because of it. We've had a commodity boom. We've had the Chinese coming into the continent. It's those type of things. It's not because all of a sudden aid is working effectively. We know what works. We know that more trade is better than less trade. We know that people need jobs. We need entrepreneurial activity. We need people to be innovative. It's not a big mystery. And unfortunately, aid, not only does it not help get to that point, it actually detracts from those type of activities on the continent.
Okay, thanks. Let's open it up to the floor. I won't ask you about the impending election of Jacob Zuma, which we chatted about in my office beforehand. Let's go ahead and answer questions. Let me start. Tony in the back.
Hi, thank you very much. In listening to your talk, I'm Tony, sorry, introduce myself. Tony Holmes. I'm the State Department Fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations, and I work on Africa. Based on my experience, most of the past 30 years in Africa, it strikes me that there's a huge element of the aid relationship between the developed world and Africa that you're not focusing on at all. Maybe you're just assuming it away. But we give aid for an awful lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid that poverty reduction and economic growth are well down on the list. And I just wonder if you broadened your focus a little bit and looked at all of the aid we give, its nature and what we try to accomplish with it, you wouldn't come out with a more positive conclusion about its efficacy.
Probably. As somebody said to me that I was completely wrong. Actually, it does give job creation. It's just that it's not job creation for Africans. You're probably right. I think that, but I'm sitting here as a concerned African citizen. I'm not sitting here as somebody who's indifferent. And I think ultimately, you are right that if we looked at it from a different lens, we could actually start to say that actually aid is beneficial. But ultimately, if I go back to the literature, which I do give a brief history of aid in the book, the purpose was very simple. There's some basic models. Savings leads to investment, leads to growth. In these newly independent countries, there wasn't enough savings, so let's give them aid so that aid would provide financing for investment and therefore lead to growth. On that metric alone, aid is not working. And so that's the metric that I'm using. The fact that people change the goalposts and they say, well, actually now 2 million Africans are on ARVs and perhaps there's another reason why aid is being given is to me relatively immaterial, particularly to the extent that aid is not innocuous. The problem is that it actually is limiting the opportunities for growth across the continent, and that's why I've written this book.
Please state your name and your affiliation.
John Beatty from UBS. It has been estimated that in order for a private sector toll road to be feasible, you need at least 100,000 passenger vehicles per day in traffic. If you look at Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda by way of example, there's only one road, namely the Nairobi-Mombasa highway, that generates traffic of at least 100,000 passengers in traffic per day. Given the lack of sufficient passenger traffic in a lot of countries, would you not say that there is a role for the public sector to be involved in financing road development, especially as infrastructure is one of the critical issues that African countries face as impediments to growth?
Mm-hmm. I'll just say what I'd commented on earlier, which is that absolutely there's a role. When you say public sector, absolutely agree. There is a role for public sector. What I'm quibbling with here is the manner in which the public sector would finance those type of interventions or that type of delivery of infrastructure. I actually did write a paper while I was at Goldman Sachs last September. I published a paper on infrastructure costing in Africa, not just roads and railways, but also mobile phones, and broke down in detail how much it would cost. And actually, it is cheaper than we would think in terms of sort of an initial reaction. My point is that absolutely, we need public sector interventions in those places, but ultimately we want to have the discussion on where African governments can raise the money to finance those infrastructure programs. It could be aid in the short term, but the problem again is we do not want open-ended commitments. And too often these open-ended commitments, as we were talking about earlier, become a sort of an artifact of the model of development and policy making. People begin to think of it as permanent income. They put roads in place and they don't bother having toll roads, even in the cities. And so ultimately we're trying to get to a situation where African governments will start to think about investing in infrastructure, but by finding ways of financing development that are not just aid.